Well, hello, and welcome to the first of several shows outlining the Beal Early Childhood Center Building Committee and its work in town. My name is Jim Kane, Vice Chairman of the Board of Selectmen and Chairman of the Building Committee. And with me today is Sandy Frick, Chairman of the School Committee, Joe Sawyer, our Superintendent of Schools, Patrick Collins, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and longtime Finance Committee member, John Marciello, who is no longer a member of the Finance Committee, but uniquely qualified to play a key role in the Building Committee.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us for this show today. The objective for this show and several coming forward will be to inform you of the work of the Building Committee and the basis for that work relative to Beal School and how the school system will continue its early education, kindergarten through fourth grade across our town. I think I'd like to start by just asking you to step back a bit relative to this process with the Mass School Building Authority. Actually, it was 2011 when the town first submitted a statement of interest to the state relative to the future of Beal School. The Beal School, as many folks know, is a very old structure in town. Not all of the early childhood center activities are held at that school because of space. The failure of our ability to deal with all of the number of younger kids in the school system has resulted in a mishmash of programs across the town, which others will get into in a few moments. It was in 2014 that the town actually said no thank you to the state when it invited us to apply again for Beal, because there were other priorities before the town at that time. Since then, we have a responsibility to look at our physical structure above ground and below ground and to bring forward what we think are appropriate ways to respond to that. So over the summer, the town got notification from the state that we would be invited back, and we formally accepted, and the Board of Selectmen formed a building committee. That committee has met twice since that time over the summer. And we are now deep into our work, leading to a special town meeting in December. Having said that, this is not one of these projects that will happen today, tomorrow, or next week. We're very much in the information gathering mode at this point. And that's what we want to educate you folks to and offer information to the townspeople about where we are, what information we're gathering, and then what is that process moving forward. However, I think, again, it's important for all of us to step back and actually understand how early education is done in Shrewsbury. We have a fantastic high school. We have that fantastic middle school campus between Sherwood and Oak, and we have a series of very high-performing elementary schools. Mm-hmm. So I'd like the superintendent to walk us through, along with Sandy, as to how we deal with that kindergarten through fourth grade group of students across Shrewsbury.
Sure. I think maybe Sandy can start with sort of a history of Beal and how it came to be configured the way that it is, and then I can talk a little bit about the programmatic piece that goes with it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because the history of Beal, some of the information I wasn't even aware of until Dr. Sawyer gave it to me. It opened in 1922 as a town high school, and when the high school moved to Oak in the late 50s, it became a grade school and housed various grades throughout the years. By the early 1980s, it was actually taken offline for district use, and it was rented out for organizations and used as an alternative high school for students with behavioral challenges, which was something I never knew that building came offline. In 1987, due to space needs and, again, rising enrollment, which we're well aware of, it was reopened as the Shrewsbury Public School Beal Early Childhood Center. It houses all kindergartens for the entire town, and it's been an early childhood center now in its 29th year. In the mid-90s, district enrollment again continued to grow. 4 modular classrooms were added at Coolidge and 2 at Spring. In 1997, we opened the new Floral Street School, which was immediately over capacity on the first day that it opened. Then we had to quickly add 3 non-classroom spaces were converted to classrooms to deal with increasing population. And then several first grades from Floral were actually shifted to Beal and housed there. And we continue today to house kindergarten classrooms at Beal. An exception was in the 2 years prior to the override, when the first grades were all housed at Floral. But again, it created overcrowding issues with an average class size of 30 students and well over 800 students in a school that was designed for 600. In 2000, to deal with, again, continuing enrollment, the town added 3 additional modular classrooms at Patton, Fort Spring. So we have a total of 13 modulars that we continue to use today. And the renovated space at the Old North Shore School is now preschool space. It's the Parker Road School, and we continue to rent 2 classrooms at the Wesleyan Terrace building, which is behind the post office on Maple Ave. So you can see we have a very varied use of that building, but space needs are still not being met. And we have too many children for the space that we have available. So looking at the Beal project going forward, it's again, how do we best fit this pre-K through 4 configuration?
Right, and there's been other things that have pressured enrollment, not only enrollment, but program needs over time have changed, of course. And there's really a couple of key areas that I'd illustrate. First off is special education. When a lot of our elementary schools in town were built, special education programming wasn't even the law. It came online in the early 1970s, and then over time, of course, most people are well aware of the fact that there's been a significant increase in the number of children who are dealing with significant disabilities. Autism is something that was very much not prevalent, say back even in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. The number of students diagnosed with autism has continued to increase. And one of the issues we have in terms of providing mandated programming for those students is whether or not to educate those students in their neighborhood school or send them to a private educational placement outside of our school district if we're not able to provide the right kind of programming. And we want to try to educate our students within town whenever we can, and it also can be a more cost-effective model for the school district and the town as well. So we've had to take spaces that were originally designed for traditional classroom spaces and convert them to special education space, and that's been the case in all of our elementary schools at this point as well, including Beal.
Joe, does that mean that out of the full school day, that room is used for the full school day for special ed, or only a portion of, and is not available for other programming?
Yeah, it's really not available for other programming. The students might move in and out of the room themselves. They might be included in a regular classroom some portion of the day, but these are very specialized spaces. Excuse me, often students who are on the autism spectrum or have similar disabilities have a very difficult time with sensory issues. A lot of these rooms are retrofitted so that they have almost what you'd look like office cubicles so students can focus and concentrate on their work. These are students sometimes who have significant issues with their learning behaviors that will be able to allow them to be included more, and that's something that we work on, but they need to be in a substantially separate space often. So these are rooms that are retrofitted essentially to become very specialized instructional spaces, can't be used for other needs. In addition to special education, we have a mandate back in the early 2000s. There was a ballot question in Massachusetts relative to how students whose second language is English are educated in our public schools. That mandate created a lot of issues in terms of how we must educate students who come to us not speaking English. It's a very rapid expectation for them to get up to speed with their English, and I think the statistics show we do an excellent job of that, but the demographics in our community have changed over time, and we have more students than we had in the past who come to us and require those kinds of services. And again, we try to get them included in typical classrooms as quickly as possible, but they need some education in smaller spaces outside of normal classrooms, and that's also required us to find space for programming such as that.
Is that also space that is then taken out of, if you will, the pool of available space for your average school day, and it's more defined and specialized for that purpose?
Exactly. So what ends up happening, for example, is I know that we've had classrooms that are divided into, say, 4 separate areas for smaller group instruction, maybe a combination of special education and English language learning, for example. So, and then there's staff needs in these schools. Staff need places to do their work, to meet with parents. Annual meetings with parents are part of the requirement for students who have special education plans. So a lot of the things that would not have been on the screen of an architect in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s designing a school, that programmatic approach is very different now, and we've had to retrofit the use of space for a variety of reasons such as those. And in addition, the other thing creating pressure is we really want to provide as many full-day kindergarten experiences as we can. I'm of the opinion that eventually this is something the state will mandate, but it's almost become a de facto mandate. The state's been pushing it for years, and at this point we have more than 92% of students in the Commonwealth who are in full-day kindergarten if they're in a public kindergarten program. Half-day programs are something that really are pretty minimal around the state. We don't have enough room to provide a full-day option for all of our students, and that's something with this project going forward that I think it would be wise for the community to make sure that there is enough space. And that's not a big issue, but it's still classrooms. Obviously, when you house a morning kindergarten session and afternoon kindergarten session, you're doubling your occupancy of that room. And we have a lot of students at the Beal school right now. That's where our half-day kindergartens are. And there's a number of students, about 110 students, that are essentially in double sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So that full day K piece is also something that's putting pressure. So really when it comes down to this project and the MSBA taking a look at what our needs are, and they're forcing us, they're putting us through our paces to look at all the different angles that are involved. One is that Beal as a physical structure is coming to the end of its useful life as a school building. That's pretty clear, I think. But in addition to that, we do have significant space needs that have emerged because of just enrollment growth and continued population growth that's expected into the future. And because programmatic needs have changed over time, we have a real squeeze right now for pre-K to 4 space, and that's something we're hoping this project will solve for the community for the longer term.
Thank you. Patrick, if you would you walk us through the Mass School Building Authority's process? Because unlike years ago where someone said a community went in and asked for money for a school, this process really pushes back at you. We're set 5 through the high school. What we have is what we're going to have for decades to come. Great buildings, great programs. But walk through for people the pushback you get from the MSBA on a process basis to make sure not one alternative is one that people run to.
Sure.
Just how much they crunch numbers and play the devil's advocate on assumptions in school-based populations.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And the pushback I would characterize as a positive pushback in the sense that this state agency, the Mass School Building Authority, which came online several years ago, has done a fantastic job with respect to public school construction in terms of ensuring quality construction and timely construction and cost-efficient construction. And a good example of that is the most recently completed project here, the Sherwood Middle School, which was under budget and ahead of schedule. And that school, along with Shrewsbury High School, has both been designated as model schools for their grade levels in the Commonwealth. So it is a great process. It's very deliberate. It's very thorough. And there are 8 different modules, if you will, once you're invited into the process past the statement of interest. The statement of interest application is really just a test, how bad is your situation? And so Shrewsbury was one of 26 communities selected out of 97 in this most recent go-around. They do an annual process. So we were deemed to be bad enough, if you will, to merit going into what's called the eligibility phase, or module number 1. And so when you're invited to that, like we were on April 13th, we basically have 270 days in which to complete a checklist of required items as part of their process. And if we don't continue completing those items within that time frame, then the MSBA takes that as the community is really not ready. Kind of like before when Shrewsbury pulled out. And so some of those things in that 270-day period, again, it started on April 13th. We have until January 9th of 2017 to complete Module 1 and all these required items. There's a slide that we're going to show now. It's called the Milestones Progress. These are, in fact, all the required items in the MSBA process for Module 1. The first one I just want to mention is an initial compliance certification is basically the rules of the road that we have to agree. It's a kind of a quasi-legal binding agreement saying we're going to do business the way MSBA has determined that school construction is going to be done. So that was done. We formed a building committee, of course, of which we're all on, along with the town manager, the superintendent of public buildings, Bob Cox, our principal, Chris Girardi, and then Erin Boucher, who's the other community member, along with Mr. Masiello. We're giving them lots of information, this educational profile questionnaire, leads to an online enrollment projection and tons of data that we're giving them about past enrollments here in Shrewsbury. We've given them studies that the assistant town manager has completed with respect to the rising total population in Shrewsbury that's expected in years to come.
What information do they use from their own sources, Patrick?
So they'll use what I would call a modified cohort survival method, which is looking at past history of how a cohort of students progresses from grade 1 to grade 2. If you have 100 and you typically see you go to 105, you get a 5% bump from grade 1 to grade 2. That's a cohort survival ratio. And then what they also do with our input is they look at building projects in the pipeline. And so, again, the assistant town manager provided a lot of information about projects.
Residential projects in Shrewsbury.
Residential, thank you, yes. From apartment building complexes to neighborhood developments, that all those kind of external factors that aren't incorporated in the historical data. That's the modified piece. And then they'll churn their own numbers and also look at statewide trends from other factors where there's other factors that they use that basically lead to their own enrollment projection. We've also provided them an enrollment projection from the New England School Development Education Council, a very highly respected organization in the Commonwealth that does lots of enrollment. They have tons of data. All of that basically leads to what is called the enrollment certification. That has to be done by October 11th, along with some maintenance and capital planning information. And then as we progress through that green check mark on the slide.
Can I just touch on that for a second?
Yeah.
Bob Cox will be at the next show to talk specifically about that. Because one of the items that MSBA wants to ensure is that the community reinvests in itself and that they're not potentially funding a building in a community that doesn't take care of its assets.
Right.
And Bob can walk through in a variety of cases just how our buildings are in fact maintained. Now the funny thing about Beal, of course, is it's one of those catch-22s. It's nearing its ending, at the end of its useful life. I think what I heard was the last time any money was really spent in there was 1987 on the bathrooms, partly because it's that close to the end of its life.
Right.
So we'll get more detail from Bob on the next show.
And to that end, they will provide in any new school building project, if a community demonstrates good maintenance practices in capital investment, in budgeting, in good stewardship of their facilities, they will give you additional reimbursement points on your building project. So that's critically important. The most important piece, which you started the show with, is the December special town meeting. We need to, in this time period, have an appropriation for a feasibility study. And that's a required element of any new building project. And that is where we hire professionals, a project management company, an architect, and we spend lots of time, again, poring over this information in our educational program and trying to design a couple of options to solve our problem. And that is where, in fact, MSBA will push back on the various options. But they don't want to just see, one singular solution here. They want to see that we really kind of meet this out the best way we can to provide the best long-term solution.
Although we have to call the project something, it's not so much Beal as much as it is how do you deal with what's going on at Beal and in those grade levels across town. Right. And as we work toward that, we will seek approval to go out and get a special team to look at these numbers and see how across town we could. What are the alternatives? Where's land available?
Right.
Is renovation an option? This town has a record of renovating certain buildings, Oak, right? Versus Sherwood was too far gone, so we built a new building. That was the smarter business decision. So it's at that point that we'll seek the support of town meeting and go forward and run those potential options to ground, and then again do it in a very open
and everybody
fashion.
Naturally, this is kind of a natural, we have a Beal building committee. Everybody wants to, well, so what's the solution? So what's the solution?
Yeah.
And really it's the process that's in front of us that will help determine what that is. We don't know what the solution is right now.
But this is certainly keeping you busy.
Oh, absolutely.
With a full plate of data being pushed forward. So, John, you joined the committee with a unique perspective, umpteen years.
I'm a unique person.
That's true in so many ways. But umpteen years from the construction background, a lot of experience in what I would describe as the heavy concrete side of that business. And you've spent how many terms on the Finance Committee?
I did 3 terms on the Finance
There you
Committee.
go. So you have a thorough understanding of the town's finances, been a lifelong resident as far as I know. And you come at it from the construction, and one of the reasons we were pleased that you put in for the, participation in this building project was because of that unique background.
Thank you.
Walk us through your observations of Beal, the physical building. Now, we're not asking you to play the role of an architect or what have you, but as you look at a building of that age, you have experience working in them. What are the challenges that one faces?
Well, when you renovate a building of that type, and it was a very well-built building for its time, Beal is a 3-brick wall bearing building, which performs very well with weight acting upon it, which performs very poorly in the event of a seismic or heavy wind event. A 3-tier brick has no flexural strength to it whatsoever. When you renovate a building of that type, if the value of the improvements exceed 2/3 the value of the building, which a project of this nature certainly would, you have to bring the entire structure into current seismic codes. Now, let's face it, the insurance companies write the building codes because they have to pay for any failures. So I believe they have gone a bit overboard with these seismic requirements, but despite what John Massiello thinks, we do have to obey the building codes, and any new or very heavily renovated structure does have to comply to those. And a 3-tier brick building offers very complex problems when arranging for seismic reinforcement.
Certainly difficult to change the physical space.
That's right.
The blocks are the blocks. I went to the Hildreth Elementary School in Marlborough, and it's basically that same era. I think it was a Works Progress Administration building. And as long as those spaces fit for that time and that need, you were golden. But as the superintendent said, you're walking through a need where you need different spaces for certain uses that aren't used throughout the entire school day, but for portions of that school day. You can't go dropping walls in different locations or certainly
right.
moving the walls.
Most of those walls are actually load-bearing with timber framing on top of it. So moving it is not really an option, and cutting large openings in a masonry structure like that becomes very challenging.
Very good.
And if people walk in there and they see carpet, there is asbestos tile under virtually all of it. And it's all well encapsulated. Nobody going to that building is in any health danger from the asbestos. But during a renovation, that would have to be addressed. And most of the piping, the steam piping, has asbestos on it. There's quite a cleanup that needs to be done there.
Yeah, it would be quite a renovation job, but that will be explored in the next phase, if you will. We're in the information gathering, crunching phase to move forward with Boston and then decide how we would go about evaluating those various alternatives. We will be having a night or two of open house where we will invite the public to Beal, because if you haven't had a child go through it, you probably haven't been through in years.
Right.
Like we had one of our kids went through it, a fantastic experience, but it was certainly a different building than Floral. So though the programs remain strong, the building is what it is. Anything people would like to wrap up with before we sign off?
I just think, this project, we're looking for, like you mentioned, it's a long-term solution for pre-K through 4. It isn't, we have to look at what the best interests are in a town that has a growing school population.
Yeah.
So it's
And
long-term.
as you look at the town, I think people who served on the board many years in advance of my participation, you look at the capital of our community, I think we're in great shape. Town Hall's a beautiful building. We have renovated or new fire stations. The police station is in need of attention in the shortcoming. Schools are in very good shape. Certainly, as we said, the middle school, the high school is taken care of. Now it's how do we deal with that midsection? And that's hopefully part of what this will do.
And, you know, my sense is it's going to have to be a large-sized school to solve the long-term space need. You know, one of the things that we know, just factually from going back to Floral Street School, that opened up in 1997, and then 3 years after that, we added an additional 7 modular classrooms onto 2 other elementary schools. So it was undersized. When we opened Floral, that was undersized. The high school, max design capacity of 1,700. We've got almost 1,800 students there right now. So we are over capacity there, and just slightly over at Sherwood as well. So we want to make sure that we size this appropriately for the future, so that we're not building a building, that we're building it for today's enrollment or educational program, but also to carry us into the future, because that's the most cost efficient. We're going to get at least 50 cents on the dollar from the state. So this is a wise opportunity to make a good long-term solution. I think it's going to have to be a big building.
We'll see. We'll see what the numbers go and where the alternatives are. Anything else, gentlemen? Sandy?
No, that's it.
All right, well, thanks for tuning in today. We'll be out shortly with a second version in order to keep everyone in town updated. We'd encourage you to go to the town's website, because any information that we have will be up on the website. We have monthly meetings. Feel free to attend those, or if you see any of us around town, obviously, ask any of the questions you might have as we work toward this. So thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.